Okay, so this is where things start to get a bit more interesting because we can create our own networks. And I would strongly recommend following along, playing around, just creating networks, tearing it down, just doing different stuff. In fact, that applies to all the things we've done so far because playing is the best way to learn. So if we look at this command, docker network create network A. So it does what it says on the tin. I'm just creating a network called network A. It's given me an ID back. If I do the same for network B, and what we can do here is if we do docker network ls, we can see we've got our standard ones, which we've seen before, and we can see our new networks, which is also a bridge network like the default one. We can inspect them. So if I just do docker network inspect and pick one of them, but what I'm going to do is if we go over to VS Code, now you remember earlier in the course, I showed there's a VS Code extension for Docker, and we can see containers, so I have no containers running, images, registries, networks, also volumes as well. So the reason I'm doing this is because if I right click and say inspect, which is the same as what we did on the command line, I can do the same for both, have two tabs, let's get rid of that. And I'm going to drag this over here so you can see them side by side. So we can see here they're pretty much the same. Obviously a different ID. They're both bridge networks. They've both got no containers in them at the moment, but they've got a different subnet. So this is 172.24 and this is 172.25. So any containers we create in network A will be 172.24 something, and each container would have its own IP address within that subnet, and likewise with network B. So what we're going to do now is if I go back to the terminal, I've got this other tab here, which I've split into 4 different terminals. Each of these commands are pretty much identical. So we've got docker run IT for interactive terminals. So we're going to get a shell inside the container, --rm. This just means that when I exit the shell, the container goes away. It stops having lots of stock containers lying around. I'm giving it a name, so container A1. And see this -- network? This is saying I want to put this container, I want this container to be attached to network A, and I'm just using Alpine for the shell. Over here, exactly the same command, except I'm calling it container A2, and I'm putting it in network A as well. Down here, exactly the same, but I've called it container B1, and that's in network B, and the same over here, container B2, network B. So both of these two are in network A, or will be when I create them, and both of these two will be in network B. So let's just run these. So we've now got a shell in each one. So one thing you get with a custom network, which you don't get with a bridge network, is that the container ID is a DNS entry. So if we go back to here and do docker ps, so we've got our 4 containers. If I container B2, if I just get this container ID, and I try and ping it from here, so B2 is in network B, so it's not going to be able to find it because it's in a different network. So one container that's in one network can't access a container that's in a completely different network. And if I do that down here, so this is container B1. So basically what I've tried to do that, and it's not allowed it. If I try and do this, which is in the same network, then that's found it. And just to prove this, if I take the IP address and do the same from here, instead of the container ID, then that's also can't access it either. Another thing you can do, rather than using the container ID, you can use, if I exit this one, and I'm going to add a new argument here, --hostname, and let's just say dome train. So I've recreated this container, so it's a brand new container, but I've given it a host name still assigned to network A. So now if I go to here, and so this is me trying to do that access, I can ping dome train. And that's resolved it. Now by default, when you create a container like we've done here, you can only specify one network, but once it's created, you can actually attach it to other networks. So for example, if I do docker network connect, I can't remember which way around this is. It's Docker Network Connect, network and container. So let's say network A, and I'm going to do container B1. So I'm going to attach the bottom left container to the top network. Now I should be able to, from here, ping, remember we call this DOM train? So I can now access it. So now, because I've added this container to both networks, then I can access that one. Well, I can access that. In fact, I can access them all because I'm in both networks. And then, so if we go back to VS Code, because I've got it open, so why not? So we've got the networks, which we saw. If we go to containers and look at container B1, which was the bottom left-hand one, right click and inspect and go down to the bottom, then we can see that the network is in network A and network B. And just doing the same on the command line, we can do docker inspect container B1, and we can see, so it's the same output. It's just on the command line versus the GUI. And equally, we can disconnect it. So if I find that command, I can do disconnect. And now I should no longer be able to, from here, I should no longer be able to ping DOM train, which, if you remember, is this one. And it is not letting me. And hopefully you never see that message in real life. So in the next section, we're going to look at Docker Compose and how you do networking in Docker Compose. So let's have a look at how this relates to Docker Compose. So here's our Docker Compose file. Now, if you remember me mentioning when we were first talking about this, that each of these service names becomes a DNS entry. So given the last section, you can now understand how it does that, because Docker Compose by default will use a bridge network. And if we go over to the terminal, and if we do our Docker Compose up, then if we scroll to the top, you can see that as well as saying the containers are created, it's also said network created. So this has got the Docker course prefix, and it's just called it default, but this is still a custom bridge network. In fact, if we go to the bottom and type, in fact, let's stop out of that and do -d, so it's detached. And if we do our Docker network ls, then we can see we've got the default network, the host one, which was there by standard. We've got this none. So if you don't want your containers to have a network at all, we've got our two networks we created in the last section. And we've got this one that the Docker Compose up has created. So all the containers we've just spun up as part of this Docker Compose, each one will be in the same custom bridge network. So they'll have a different IP address, but they'll all be able to talk to each other. If we do Docker Compose down, so remember this stops all the containers, and it's also removed the network. In the same way as if we do Docker Compose up without the -d, and then do Control-C, this has stopped the containers. It's not removed them. Remember, Control-C, you've got to do Docker Compose down to actually remove the containers, but it stopped them, but it hasn't deleted the network. So if we do Docker network ls, we can still see that network there. It's only when we do Docker Compose down, which that will remove the network. So just to prove this is a normal network, if we just do Docker Compose up, oh, sorry, let me stop that and do it -d in the background. Then let me get the browser up and go to localhost 124, and we can see it working. So we know we've got these services running now, front-end API database, or database seed was a fire and forget just to see the database. So, but we've got these 1, 2, 3. If I take API, for example, and if we go back to our networks I created in the last section, so let's just attach this one to our Docker Compose network. So we've got Docker network ls, we've got this one, and we can do Docker network connect that and container A1, I think. So now, technically, from here, we should be able to ping API. And we can. We should be able to ping front end. So because we've joined this container into this network, then we can then access all of these. Now, you wouldn't really do that, but that's just to demonstrate that Docker Compose is just using normal custom bridge networks. And each of these are just the host names, like we did in the last section with the Dome Train host name. Another thing that's worth mentioning with the custom bridge networks, which is regardless of if you're using Docker Compose or you're just doing it like creating Docker network create on the command line, is that the port numbers. So do you remember we've exposed these ports for containers to container communication? All ports by default are exposed, so you don't kind of need this. So to demonstrate that, front end, well, we do need front end because we're accessing that from our browser outside the network, outside Docker. We need API because the browser is also accessing it because it's just a REST call from the browser. But the database gets called by the API. So technically, we don't need to do that. Now, by getting rid of that, that means I can't access it from my computer, like on SQL Server Management Studio or whatever SQL client. But the API will be able to access it. So if I get rid of that and go back to the terminal, do Docker Compose down, completely get rid of it. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. It's because we've attached this container to it. So let's disconnect that. And then Docker Compose down. So that's able to remove the network now. If I do Docker Compose back up again, so this is now without the -p. If I click away, so go back, if I just refresh the whole page and then get podcasts, that still worked because this and this on the same network, Docker Compose is using a custom bridge network. So database is exposing all ports to API. So we don't need to be explicit. It's also worth mentioning that with Docker Compose, if you just Google for Docker Compose networking and go to the documentation networking Compose, you can actually, let's go down a bit. You can actually define networks in here and you can customize it a lot more, but by default, it'll just use a normal custom bridge network. So you can see you've got like networks here. There's saying what networks that this service is in. So it's putting them into, and it's doing things that you will probably never have to do as a developer. But if you want to dig a bit deeper, there's tons of information. To be honest, the whole docker.com is really good documentation. So anything you really kind of want to dig deeper in, there's probably going to be information here. This is probably the best place to go. So that's about as much as we're going to cover about custom bridge networks. So in the next section, we're going to talk about the host network, which we've already kind of touched on earlier on in the course when we're talking about tests. But now we'll kind of like clarify a bit more about what that means.